I learned this when I worked for Richard Branson at Virgin for 2 years. It was all about people, all the time. If you have happy people, then you will have happy customers. And if you've got happy customers, you're there. If that had failed, I'd have lost the money I invested in it. And there's no greater driver than the sense of what it might mean to fail. I think of myself more as a property developer for businesses. I tend to find businesses that are actually beautiful businesses underneath it all. And then I go and spend a couple of years doing it up and making it better and giving it a renewed purpose and a sense of vigor and direction. And that then typically makes it attractive to potential acquirers.
Today I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Ormrod, a serial food entrepreneur who is currently CEO at Cakesmiths. I'm Mark Reeves from PKF Francis Clark and I'll be your host. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, get updates and notifications as to when our latest episodes are available. Hi Chris, how are you today?
I'm good. The sun is shining, the cakes are coming out of the ovens and the coffee's warm. It couldn't be nicer actually.
I will share with our audience that we were chatting beforehand and you've got a picture of a beautiful looking lemon tart on the wall behind you, and you're actually just tucking into Portuguese tarts, which is making me very jealous and quite hungry. How fresh are they?
This one would have been out of the oven in Lisbon on Monday of this week. Wow. And then whizzed over to us. So they're frozen and then sent over. But there's nothing nicer in my life than trying freshly baked or freshly cooked food, and this is a great way of making sure we're getting the right quality here, which is what we want. Which means somebody has to eat it. It's a tough gig, but you know what? I love it. I wouldn't change it for the world.
Well, that kind of my first question. I described you as a serial food entrepreneur, and we're going to talk about. Would you agree with that description? But I think we've already hit on the reason why you might like being a food entrepreneur at that stage. Would you agree with that description?
Oh, I don't know. You know, I've never thought of myself in that respect, and other people use that tag, which I can understand it's useful. But I feel a bit of a fraud in that company because I've never set a business up from scratch. I've had loads of ideas, but never really had the courage to go ahead and do it. So I kind of think of myself more as a property developer for businesses. I tend to find businesses that are actually beautiful businesses underneath it all, perhaps have gone a bit moribund or a bit slowed down or just missing something from a particular angle. And then I go and spend a couple of years doing it up and making it better and giving it a renewed purpose and a sense of vigor and direction. And that then typically makes it attractive to a potential acquirer. So I love the fact you can call me an entrepreneur because that puts me with some hugely exalted company. But I would always think of myself as a business developer.
I probably disagree a little with that. I'd probably put it into different stages of entrepreneurialism, in that you have entrepreneurs who will start up a business, but we've talked about this in previous podcasts that they reach a limit. The delegation becomes difficult. They can't develop that trust to the next level, and therefore you need a different type of entrepreneurialism to continue with that growth, to take it to the next stage.
I think that's a fair observation. Actually, I think that's probably, in which case, in a rocket analogy, I'd see myself as the second stage, because a couple of the businesses
equally important in the mission.
I think that's exactly right, and I think. The last company before Cakesmiths that I bought from a chap who was retiring, and he knew he wasn't going to be able to take it any further. And he had the wisdom and the grace and the humility to accept that. And when I bought it, he never once interfered with what I was doing. And it was a seamless transfer.
I think Nick Rodders from Rodders Creamery summed it up best in that what got us here probably won't get us to the next stage. And it's the recognition of that becomes very difficult. So your current role at Cakesmiths, what is your current role? You describe yourself as the CEO at the moment.
Yeah, chief exec at Cakesmiths. And chief exec covers a multitude of roles, doesn't it? But ultimately, I'm responsible for where this business is going and setting the vision against which I want the management team and the colleagues here to deliver. So I'm very clear. This is what we're doing. This is the plan, how we're going to grow the business. This is the areas we're going to invest in. This is how we're going to work with and treat people. And this is how I want customers to perceive us. So it's a multitude of things, but ultimately, whether you're the CEO, the MD, the founder, whatever you want to call it, I'm the person that effectively sits at the very top of the pyramid or the bottom of the pyramid, if you want to use the inverted management theory, and then tells the business where it's going.
That's quite a good summary within there. We've talked previously on podcasts about the difference between strategy and mission and values and all that type of stuff. I like you mentioned about tone in there. That's
Mm,
quite an interesting definition of it.
mm, mm. It drives. I get frustrated. I have been frustrated in the past with people conflating, mixing up the phrase strategy and the phrase vision and values. Clearly put, if I can express it this way, a vision. If you're top of the tree, your view is, guys, I want to take that hill over there. That's my vision. We're going to take that hill. Your job is to work out how to do it, and that is strategy. And strategy comes from the Greek word strategos, meaning military plan. So therefore, I don't want to, I can tell you guys what I want the business to do, but I pay you to come up with the how we do it and what's the best way of doing it. Now, I will then challenge aspects of that strategy, but ultimately, if the management decides strategy, you've got a much better chance of achieving it. Now, values is you could talk for ages, can't you, about values and about how, but values is how I want this business to feel, how I want it to be for people who are working here, people who might be thinking of working here, and customers that come into contact with us. And by the way, families of all of the above. I've worked with some of the best entrepreneurs, I think, in the UK business world, and they've all taught me one thing more than anything else. And I learned this when I worked for Richard Branson at Virgin for 2 years. It was all about everything, all about people, all the time. If you have happy people, then you will have happy customers, and if you've got happy customers, you're there.
Couldn't agree more with that. We've talked about the balance between people, profit, and planet before, and the people element, that being really key, and also the culture that comes from amongst them being key. Let's step back a bit. That's your current role. You started quite a way away from your current role. You started as an actor.
Well, actually, I never quite made it as an actor. I failed as an actor. I had an overarching desire to be on stage. I loved, winning the applause of people, and I loved performing and standing up and doing stuff. So I had the chance of doing a degree in theatre and drama, which I did with a view to going on stage or into film, etc. And as part of my degree, we used to go to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival each year. And we put on, in my final year, the big show. And that's where theoretically the agents turn up, you get signed up, and you're away forever. And I had the world's worst set of reviews for a performance of a play I was in. Because you rush off in the morning to get the Scotsman, which is the morning newspaper, where all the shows are reviewed. And the show I was in was slated, but I was singled out for a particular critique. But I also, therefore, then met my future wife, who was also doing a theatre degree, and she happened to win a Fringe first and went on to do a short space in London. So my acting career lasted a millisecond of a jot. And the only claim to fame I've got is that my flatmate at uni was a one chap called Andy Serkis, who people who've watched Lord of the Rings or King Kong, he's the body double for it. He was a geography student who I convinced to come and do drama. So that's about it. But all joking apart, what drama courses do teach you is the ability to stand up in front of a group of people, control your natural, sometimes your breathing or your fears or your thought process, and be able to put across in an interesting way a concept. As I sort of segued into what seemed to be a fairly natural career in sales, it stood me in good stead. And I think looking back, although I think I'd still like to have had a go at being in a film of some description. I did do an appearance on the Noel Edmonds Late Late Breakfast Show once, to much critical acclaim from my family. But that's about the lot.
So how did you go from that to working for people like Mars, Haagan Dazs, Virgin, etc.?
I went back to Brum, which is where I'm from, having failed to become an actor, and just looked in the papers for jobs, as you did at that stage. There was no LinkedIn, WhatsApp, online. There was no online search engines, and there was a job advertised for Mars as a sales rep in central Brum. And all I vividly remember, is that they were going to pay me in 6 months my entire student grant for the last 3 years, and I got a free car. And so I applied for the job, and hugely fortunately got it. And I think Mars opened my eyes fundamentally opened my eyes to what the world of business and commerce could be about. And I work with some great people who have all gone on in their own world to do great things, and I've stayed friendly with the majority of them. It was Mars in many respects was my business university education, and I have nothing but the highest praise for it. After Mars, I ended up with people that I work with who phone me up and say, "I've just joined X. Would you come and join? I've just done this. Come and join." And so it was a bit of an ad hoc career progression, but I left to work for Haagan Dazs, the ice cream business, just as it set up in the UK. And I did that for a bit. Then I worked for a soft drink company. And at that point, we did a JV with Virgin. I ended up working for Richard for 2 years, which was just the beginnings of what I now know was the beginnings of a career to run my own business.
What did you gain from people like Richard Branson around you? What did they teach you?
Not to be afraid of anything, and to absolutely, in the nicest sense of the word, just loosen up and have some fun at work. And if you can make your business differentiate itself from those around you, your competitors, if you can engage with your customers and your staff in an honest, open manner, and just to a certain extent, don't wear a tie. I learned that one very early on with Richard when he cut it off. You only wear a tie in the Virgin Group if you're an accountant. But just to be honest, and just to break boundaries. A classic example, I was really frustrated once Richard came back into the office. Well, he'd been at a meeting in London, and he said, "We're going to run the V Festival in Reading. It'd be like Glastonbury in Reading." And I said, "Well, really exciting, Richard." And he said, "I said, well, who's going to run it?" He went, "Well, you are, Chris." And I said, and I'd lost my temper. For the first and only time I lost my temper with Richard, and said, "I haven't got the time of day, Richard. I'm doing this. Virgin do run themselves a bit lean and a bit mean." And he looked at me and smiled and said, "No, you'll be fine. You'll do it." And I said, "Rich, I absolutely can't do it." At which point, my then PA, Nikki, piped up and said, "Well, I'll do it." And I turned around and I was going to say, to my eternal shame, "But you're just a secretary." And before I said that, Richard looked at me with his megawatt smile and said, "There you go, problem solved," and bounced out of the office. Well, Nikki and her pal rented a caravan and ran that festival, the very first V Festival, to huge critical acclaim. And a few weeks later, Richard was interviewed on I think Beeb Radio 4, and he name checked Nikki. He said, "At Virgin, we have a history of giving people rope to see how far they go before they hang themselves, and then we rescue them before they die." He said, "There's one particular girl within the empire, Nikki, who did the Virgin Festival. Now it was just magnificent." And what I learned from that was, you know what? You can ask people to do some amazing things. And you've typically got better people in your organization than you ever give it credit for. And every day here, I am staggered when I talk to people and I find out what sort of interests they've got, what hobbies they've got, what they do outside their work time that makes them motivated in life. And if you can tap into that, then you're a lucky person.
We come back to that people thing again and again, which is a topic we've covered a number of times. On a side issue, you once did a security guard for Richard Branson to a Baywatch star.
Yeah, well, we were launching Virgin Cola, and we really admired the Coca-Cola wasp-shaped bottle, and so we were trying to work out what to do as a Virgin equivalent. And so Richard came up with this idea. Well, we originally called it the Mae West, and then Richard said, "No, who the modern Mae West would be? I know, Pamela Anderson." And he then bounded out the room. And I was the sales director at Virgin. I looked at James, the marketing director, and said, "Where's he gone?" Anyway, 10 minutes later, Richard came back in all smiles and said, "Sorted. She's coming across on Sunday to help us with the launch." And I said, "Who are you talking about, Richard?" He said, "Pamela Anderson." And I said, "Get away." He said, No. He said, "You don't know." So I've just appeared in an episode of Baywatch, which hasn't yet been broadcast. So I got to know Pam really well. I've just phoned her up, offered her some free tickets on Virgin on Atlantic to fly over, and I'll pick her up. And so I said, "Well, do you want me to pick her up from the airport?" He said, "No, I'll do that." He said, "But Monday, you're in charge of security." Well, we must have had 140, 150 of the world's photographers outside the event where we were staging the stunt. And the black Range Rover turned up and back door opened, and out came Pamela Anderson. And she looked at me, and Rich must have wound up. She went, "Hi, you're Chris. You're in charge of my security." And I was just in pieces. And then she said, "Right, very professionally, which of your customers do you want me to meet?" I went, "Well, I got Sean here from Tesco's. I'm sure he'd like to say hello." So I think this is surreal. I'm in the middle of London with at that point, one of the world's mega stars introducing her to the soft drink buyer from Tesco. And it was one of the happiest days of my life. She was an absolute star and a real joy to work with for that period of time. So, yeah, so I think, and if you can create those magic, I mean, I'm really never going to get a chance to do that again. But those magic moments, that stayed with me for years. And it's a lovely way in which Richard and I, subsequently, when I left Virgin and my first son, Henry, was born 3 months, 12 weeks premature, I had a note from Richard saying that one of his children, I think it's Holly, his daughter, had also been premature and that they soon grow up and everything will be fine. And I just thought that was a class act. There's a chap who absolutely understands what it's like putting people at the heart of the organisation.
We'll come back to that. Let's go back right to the start of your entrepreneurial career then. From there, you went into Ministry of Cake, as it became named.
Yeah.
How did that transition work?
Oh, it was fantastic. I had no real idea what I turned 40 and I just went home one night. I was living up in Suffolk and I said to Kate, I can't do this anymore. If we're really going to break out and do all the things we want to do in life, then I need to earn more than we're earning now. And I want to run my own business. I've just had enough. And so we decided that we were going to sell our house up in Suffolk, take the equity out of it and go and find a business. And that's, in a sense, that's the easy bit. The hard bit is then finding a business because you're not the only person looking to buy them. And of course, I was, a nobody with no real, I had a reputation in the corporate world, but nothing in the private equity or the business back world. And so I engaged the services of a corporate finance advisor who was brilliant and was really helpful. And we found a business on its knees down in Somerset called Maynard's or Maynard Scott's. And it was an old dessert manufacturer. And and I'd always been working in retail, the world, selling to supermarkets like Sainsbury's and Tesco's and Asda and Waitrose. This business just did catering and food service. So it was the back end of nothing really. But it was the only chance I had. So I met the owners, made them an offer to buy the business on the basis of working there for a year to get it to a level of profitability. So I had 12 months to get it turned around. And I think Stuart Rose coined the phrase, because there's no plan B with Marks and Spencer's. And he was exactly right. I had no plan B. I had to make that business work. If that had failed, I'd have lost the money I invested in it. I'd have had to go back to the corporate world and effectively start all over again. And there's no greater driver than the sense of what it might mean to fail. But you didn't think about that. I got so excited. I bought the business, and I then realized quite quickly that it was seen by customers as a great product, but a really staid, old-fashioned, antediluvian business. And I thought, right, the first thing I'm going to do is thinking about I need to give this a quirky name. What am I going to call it? Sat in the kitchen one night with Kate, my wife, and we chucked around some names. And she said, I really like the name Ministry of Sound. And I went, Ministry. I said, what about Ministry of Cake? Because I can call myself Prime Minister. Won't that be a blast? And quickly registered the domain, called it Ministry of Cake, and that was it. And, sometimes great idea, and this was, I think, a great idea of Kate's, sometimes great ideas snowball. And people got on it. So my sales director called himself the Foreign Secretary. Clearly, my finance director called himself the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And it just gave us publicity coup after publicity coup, to the point when Nick Clegg was the Deputy Prime Minister and Nick Robinson was doing a follow around. He was doing it, following around. They came and filmed a 3-hour slot at Ministry of Cake because they could use all of the cliched phrases like the icing on the cake, the last slice, sharing the pie. And I got to be Nick Clegg served me with a slice of cake as a photo op. It all came out of that. It all came out of that name. So the business was good fun. I loved dealing with customers, and that was reciprocated. We grew the business very quickly from 4.5 mil turnover to the second time I sold it, we got it to 32 million. So we grew it fast.
Well, you talk about the second time you sold it. You bought and sold it twice, in effect.
Yes, that's right.
Over a sort of 10, 12-year period. How did that actually work?
Well, when I bought it the first time, literally, you buy the business, and I'm now backed by private equity, and some of your listeners will be familiar with that, and others won't. I've had a great time with private equity, and I think if you get it right and it works, there's no better experience. And I enjoyed the backing of private equity. We'd only owned it for just under 2 years when the phone went one day, and effectively it was a potential business looking to buy us. So we thought, well, if they're interested, then others might be. So we discreetly put the business on the market. And at that point, Greencore, the big Irish food conglomerate, were looking to expand away from retail and do something in the world of food service. And they saw us as a strategic land grab for them. So they bought us. and I agreed to stay with them for a 2-year period for the earn-out. The idea was I'd sell it to them, work there for 2 years, and then I'd go and do something else, and same again. But it was about 3 weeks after I sold it that some of your older listeners might recognise the phrase "Northern Rock closed their doors," and the world went to hell and back in a handbasket. And that wasn't the time to be buying a business, I didn't think. So I hunkered down and sadly became a corporate fiend again within Green. But Greencore, great business. And working for Patrick Coveney, who was then the chief exec, was pretty much like running my own business. But I knew relatively quickly on that although they bought me to get into food service, they had then also tried to America, and America was starting to take more of their time and effort. So very kindly, Patrick said, you know what, if you want to buy Ministry back, we'll let you have it, but it's got to be a fair valuation. We're not going to let you have it on the cheap. And I bought it back from them and ran it again. But this time, having learnt the first time round, this time I knew exactly who would be the acquirers when I bought the business. And one tip I'd give people is if you're going to borrow a lot of money to buy a business, you need to have a pretty clear view in mind of what your exit route is going to be, or what your exit options are. And I knew exactly, as it turned out, the company that I thought would have a major interest were the people that bought us the second time round.
I suppose there's a lesson in that. You talked about purpose earlier and staking that's where we want to be. I suppose that applies to the generalities of owning the business as well as working in the business itself.
I think that's a really interesting question, because therein lies the difference. I think there are some businesses like Iceland, for example, where Richard Walker is running a business clearly for the future, for the family, for the future. The Samworth brothers, where I spent many happy years working as sales director at Ginsters, David Samworth, that business is in trust for his family for the future. So they don't have that exit driving options. But when you run a business as I do, in order to make money from it, then effectively you only really make your best money when you're buying and selling businesses. And so, the aim is, and I'm very open with the staff when I buy a guy, this is what I do, this is what I'm aiming to do. But my promise to you is we will make this business bigger and better so that when it does become owned by somebody else, you will have career choices and paths within that new organization, if that's what you choose to do. And if you don't, and I can help to develop you. So for example, my HR manager here, really ideally in 5 years' time, would love to be an HR consultant and working for herself. So we've worked out over the next 5 years, how can we at best use what we do here at Cakesmiths to help her get to where she wants to go? And I'd be no happier person if she ends up one day doing that.
I think there's an odd thing we do measure sometimes about staff turnover and stuff like that. And we get very obsessed with statistics. Whereas actually, if you are developing people and they are going on to be more successful, then that sort of staff turnover is a good way of doing things. And I've seen numerous examples over the years where they go on to new roles and then they'll find something that will help you or your business in the future.
Yeah, I think that's right. I learned that at Mars. There were a lot of very good people at Mars. Mars employed, some brilliant brains, but ultimately not everybody can get promoted. So you end up with some very, very, very capable people. And I was one of them who couldn't get the next level promotion for all the right reasons. There were better people than me doing it. So I didn't get promoted at Mars. I was really miffed. But the bloke who got the promotion, Rich Baker, went on to become chief exec of Boots and chairman of Whitbread. So I can't argue with that. He's a good guy. And my wife thought he was better looking than me, which never helped.
I'm not sure I'd admit that. We might cut that from the podcast. That's all right. So you then went on to be chief, and I've got to be careful with my pronunciation here, chief flavorista at Flavorworks after that.
Well, this was a lovely one. This came from nowhere, Mark. I got phoned up. I'd just sold Ministry Cake the second time, and this time I wasn't staying with the new acquirers. The French quite rightly wanted to run that business in a different way. So I was looking at a couple of options, and I had a phone call from a private equity house who were looking to bid into a business, but the chief exec designate had pulled out. Would I be interested? And so it's very similar to the case. So it was a lovely business in the middle of Wincanton in Somerset. I had a particular niche in the marketplace for creating marinades and sauces, the sort of things that you see in sachets with chicken fillets in the supermarket. And it was beautiful products, but again, quite tired commercially. And it used to be called Marcus Products because the son of the owner was called Mark, and therefore they called the business Mark and Us, or Marcus. And I thought, how do I, in a world where these little ingredient business, how do I get to stand out? And the more I sat with customers, and when they tried products, they all said, gosh, this is lovely. You get such great flavor. So actually the customers gave me the name. I just went home one night and thought, Flavor Academy, Flavorworks. That'll do. And so we called ourselves Flavorworks. And I thought, right, I need to give myself a title. I can't call myself Prime Minister anymore. Intergalactic empire of all known things, that wouldn't work. So I thought, Chief Flavorista. I'll call myself the Chief Flavorista. And I encouraged everybody to come up with a quirky name on their business card, and then on the flip side, have their normal title. So, uh, what was my HR manager, Janine, called herself the head of resource, spelt resource as in sauce, as in brown sauce. And we had all sorts of fun. But once people get engaged in that and they buy into it, as long as it's not seen as frivolous, and you've always, I think, got to be a little careful. I see lots of examples of what I call just forced frivolity. If you're going to do it, it's got to be genuine. You can't force it. People need to come to it.
I'd agree. I see more of that on the American side than I do on the
Yeah,
British side of
it
things.
was
They
such a
seem to
fun
take it to
business
an
to work
extreme.
for. Yeah, it comes across as a bit insincere. Whereas if you get it right, it can be beautifully empowering. And when I designed some T-shirts for all members of staff where we had official taster on the back of it and a proper design on the back. And I was once taught, if you're going to do a T-shirt design, make it so good that your staff wouldn't mind wearing it down to the gym, and then you'll know you've got your designs right. And so I said, right, T-shirt, let's see who can get this T-shirt photographed in the most bizarre places in the world. Well, my lawyer, if you're listening, Stuart, you know it's you, sent me a photograph of him wearing the T-shirt 50 feet down below in a sub-aqua kit. It was fantastic. But it's good fun. It's good fun.
I happen to know that lawyer, and that doesn't surprise me at all on that side. He would have taken that as a personal challenge at
He
that
does. He
stage.
does. He does.
Okay, slight divergent at that stage. You also then got involved with Somerset Larder. How did that
Yeah,
come
this
about?
was near where I live. They're building Hinkley Point, the nuclear reactor, nuclear power station, and I think that, and this it's backed by EDF, the French electricity company. But they have created a big business called NNB, which clumsily but stands for Nuclear New Build, and NNB are responsible for the on-site building and delivery of that power station. And the NNB guys have part of the remit from the government in giving permission to build it is that they do as much good as they can commercially for the local environment and the local area. So they wanted to take food from producers around it, and a group of producers got together. But it's a huge project, Mark. There are 8,600 people eating 4 times a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Logistically, it is a serious bit of business. And the caterers at the time, that were the local caterers at the time, just couldn't cope with it. They were a Bristol firm used to doing office functions and a few weddings. And effectively, N&B were getting to a stage where they were going to have to go to one of the big multinationals, which they didn't want to do. And then I got a phone call saying from a commercial app, could I go in and give the guys a hand to shape themselves commercially, and then they could keep the supply contract, which is what N&B wanted to do. And so I got involved, and I brought in an MD and formed it had been a not-for-profit company which was not fulfilling its purpose. I changed it to a proper business owned by shareholders, so there was some commercial impetus in the business. We formed a small group and we set about running it as a proper catering business. And it just took off. We went from revenues of 0 to about 6 million quid in 18 months. And we employed, when I left there, when I sold it, we were employing, I think, 450 people. And the proudest bit, Mark, is that those people, broadly young people, were all from the local area. And they were being taught in the hospitality industry, entertainment, food, manufacturing, logistics, these lovely skills, and getting paid really well for it. I mean, it's going to employ 1,000 people on an ongoing basis when the building is finally finished in the mid-20s. But I'm very proud of that business. And then we got a phone call from a British catering business, Baxter Story, that were looking to get into the world of business and industry, and they saw us as an exemplar of what you can do. And so we very happily put the business into their ownership, and I think they've done a superb job with it.
I think the controversies of nuclear energy and power, which is raging across Europe at the moment, as some nuclear stations are opened and some nuclear stations are closed,
Yeah.
I think that hides the underlying story of the sheer scale of the operations
It's massive.
of actually
It's massive.
constructing and running these things.
I felt very, I mean, whatever your personal view of nuclear power per se, the construction of it and the way in which they're training lots of people, young people in the world of construction, food. There are a lot of good people going to come out of there with proper qualifications to go and do things elsewhere. It's been but the interesting one for me, I'd never been asked to do a 10-year forecast before. I mean, I'm used to doing 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, occasionally a 5 year plan. But the nuclear boys, their forecast horizons are so we now look. So imagine your menus today, because you've got largely physical labourers building the site. So you're heavy on carbohydrates, you're heavy on big chunky foodstuffs. But in 8 to 9 years' time, the workforce will be broadly software engineers, intellects, yeah, and so therefore you're looking at quinoa and dami beans and salads. It's a very, I've never gone to that level of forecasting before, but it was. The other one that was interesting as you get a little bit older in your career, being the chairman of a business as opposed to being the MD. It's a bit more like being a grandparent. At the end of the day, you can give it back to the team and go, "There you go, guys." Uh, but I really enjoyed sharing it, and I enjoyed the experience of helping that team really get under the skin of what they could do and delivering a brilliant business.
Well, that brings us back to where you are at the moment. Obviously, your whole career based on the food industry. Why the food industry? What is it about the food industry that excites you and keeps on bringing you back?
I love food. I do love food. I think the reality of it is it's broadly recession resilient. So, I've been through 2 or 3 serious recessions now and COVID and never had to lay people off. And I've always been able to grow businesses during the course of that. So, I'm an optimistic person naturally. I would hate to be in a situation where I'm running a business which isn't in growth. I'd find that really hard and a difficult thing to do. But I've enjoyed, and also I think once you're in the food industry and you start to make a level of contact within the food industry, then I think we find it easy to stay here.
You
I
build
enjoy
that
it. I really do
experience.
enjoy it.
What are the challenges for that industry going forward? Because the food industry is really strong in the southwest.
Yeah.
Why is that, and what challenges are we facing?
Well, I think we've got a good food tradition in the southwest, particularly dairy and dairy-related products and meat. Challenges, I suspect they're exactly the same as others. Energy prices are obscene in how they've kept going. Labour and labour availability, whatever one's view of Brexit, I do think we've had issues as a result of that. In getting just people to want to come and work here, forget what we pay, but we pay significantly above living wage, and we still find it hard to get staff. Ingredient inflation has been a constant issue and a worry. So I think managing all of that is normal. What we've had to overlay here is the issue of significant and severe growth. I mean, this business has grown in the space of 2 years tenfold. We sold £150,000 2 years ago in February. This February, we sold £1.5 million in 1 month. So I'm managing here a roller coaster, an ex-West Wrong roller coaster. It is an absolute rocket of growth. And I often think that managing extreme growth is as difficult, if not more difficult, than managing no growth, because you have to keep a very dedicated bunch of people making sure all the plates are spinning and you're delivering what you are selling to customers.
I suppose difficult in a different way. It's
an enjoyable way, but it's tiring, Mark. You can see it, so you think, you know what? You've got a bunch of guys and girls who are working incredibly hard to fulfill the orders that we're sending out, and so we're doing everything we can to help them, and we've invested £500,000 in new kit, £500,000 in new labour, but it's it's good. But that's what we do, isn't it? That's what we're in business for. That's the hobby.
I suppose, again, that comes back, though, to making sure that everyone's aligned on purpose. We talked in one of the last podcasts about productivity, increasing productivity, which is one of the British issues. If you've got staff that are properly engaged and understand the purpose, that itself lends to helping address the productivity gap.
I think you're right. I'd also add that it's really important to define what you mean by productivity within the organisation that you're in. And how do you come up with a very clear, crystal clear measure that allows everybody in the business, wherever they are, to understand? So here, after much debate, when I first started here, there were 20 odd pages of spreadsheet driven database analysis, you call it. But when you boil it down, we make cake, and we have a finite number of people that make cake. So if we divide the number of cakes that we make by the number of people that work here, you come up with a cakes per person per week, or a CPW, we call it. And when I started here, we were making broadly 220 cakes per person per week. I just checked this morning if I can. Last week we made 312 cakes per person per week. So that's near enough a 50% productivity improvement in the last 12 months as a result of working better, smarter. But people can tell me as I walk around what the number is because it's just one number. So we've boiled everything down to one critical number that everybody knows, and we have that as a common language within the business.
I see that sometimes as a downside when equity get involved, in that you end up drowning in KPIs because
You do.
everyone's trying to measure everything
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And I think you've got to remember, as I said to the equity guys, is look, you guys are the financial backers, but I run the business. So I can give you what you want, and I can certainly come up with a suite of bits that you need for your internal reporting. But I'm running this business on no more than 10 crystal clear measures: productivity, sales, contribution or gross margin, employee sickness, because that's a critical one for us to look at, because you can start to see the wheels coming off when people are taking too much time off, and then stock, and ultimately, for those of us who run businesses, cash in the bank, which is the one bit when I first ran Ministry Cake, I got everything else right. I forgot about cash in the bank. I got sales right. That really ticked off the operations director because he couldn't make enough. Then when he made enough, my finance director said, "We're about to run out of cash." I think, oh my God, I didn't even think about money in the bank, but of course
Yeah,
that's
cash is the ultimate arbiter at that particular moment, isn't it?
it really is. It really is. It really is.
You mentioned earlier, and when we talked before, you'd ultimately love to start your own business and grow that. Is
Mm.
that still an ambition?
For definite, it's just as I said right at the very start. I kind of I don't think of myself as an entrepreneur because I haven't started a business, and I think you're right actually, Mark, that there are different sorts of entrepreneur, and perhaps I'm a different sort. But I would love to start a business up from scratch, and now I've got a little bit of money in the bank as a result of all the things I've done. Then there are things I can start to look at and decide whether that's what I want to do, because I just think it would be a brilliant challenge. So yeah, I'd love to. That's the one bit I don't want to go to my grave not having had a go at that.
Well, perhaps you can take to heart from the different levels of entrepreneurialism that we
Mm.
talked about. I want to come back on that name thing very quickly as we get towards the end of the podcast. We talked about names and the power of names in there. One of the best names I think I've ever come across was an early name which was part of Maynard's, I think you were saying, Enchanting Dessert Gardens of Dr. Chocolate, which is such an image painting
Mm.
name at that
Mm.
stage.
It is. It's kind of it's images of rivers of chocolate running through a brown valley of fudge, isn't it? It's
You've got Willy Wonka in the
yeah,
background of that.
yeah.
The power of that name seems to have followed you through your career as well. You talked about rebranding Ministry of Cake. You talked about Virgin Cola launches and stuff like that. What's that mean, really? What's that
Well,
come to?
all I'm ever trying to do, is make myself, my business, the business, stand out in a world where there's so much else going on around it. And so trying to achieve a standout name or something, if I can, I worked for Haagan Dazs when we were first launched in the UK, and I'd phone up people and nobody would have a clue what Haagan Dazs meant, who we were, what it was. It was only when we came up with a load of adverts that drove the infamous startup attempt that we knew where that was. But I always thought, right, if I could come up with a name. So when I called my business Ministry of Cake, if I phoned up a company to speak to the buyer, if the person who answered the phone went, Ministry of Cake, well, that sounds like I wouldn't mind working there, then you knew you were halfway there. And Flavorworks, just the same. And Cakesmiths, ironically, is the first business I've owned in the last few years that I haven't renamed because it does exactly what it says on the tin. So Cakesmiths, I've had a much lower requirement to rebrand this business because it does itself really well. And just all I'm doing here is putting more nitrogen into the fuel tank. But I think the concept for me is always about whether it's you as an individual. And I think, for those of us who are starting out in our careers, it's important to stand out. I'm just trying to stand out in the crowd and to
I suppose
make me
that's
a
so
memorable business
important
to live with.
nowadays.
Mm.
The crowded marketplace. Okay. Last question from my side. What's the most outrageous cake you've ever seen or eaten or been aware of?
I had the privilege of being asked to be a cake judge at the International Confectionery Cake Show at the NEC a few years ago, and I think I make good looking cake here, and I think we do make some very attractive cake. But these people that I was judging the sugar paste and decoration exhibits, and the people I was judging took it to a different level. So the one that stands out in my mind, it's a real shame we can't do a visual on this, but you remember the film, Disney film Maleficent, where Angelina Jolie played Maleficent?
Yep.
A life-size version of that in marzipan and sugar icing. And believe you me, it was as realistic as they come. It was like a mannequin, it was like a waxwork.
Wow, I
There's
can't beat that. That's a hell of a way to end a podcast at that stage. Thank you, Chris. Thanks so much for joining us, sharing your story with our listeners. Hope our listeners have enjoyed it as much as I have. It's been really good to talk about the power of names, the importance of the food industry, and get an idea of that side of things. And thank you to our audience for listening to our latest episode of Business Noodles and Doodles. Hope you've enjoyed our conversation. This is the last episode of the current series, but we'll be back later in the year with some more episodes. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to get updates and notifications on when our latest episodes are available.